Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Just Two Dads with my co-host, co-founder, partner in crime and thrive, Mr. Shawn Francis. I am Brian Altunian, and today we're going to be talking about change. It's a new year. How many of you have heard that? New year, new me, new year, new you, whatever. It's really what it talks about is change and how we adapt to it. Some by our own hand, some by the hand of God. So stick with us today for a great topic on change and how we adapt. Hey, everybody. Welcome back. Just Two Dads. This is episode, is it 119, Shawn? Because now we've gone back and forth. 118, 119.
Yeah. It's 18 or 19. 20. I'm not sure.
We're gonna break our episodes up into seasons here, so we can actually because we've been doing this for 2.5 years, and we love the conversation. Sometimes we have great guests on, people who are serving and servicing the special needs community. Sometimes it's just Shawn and I talking about general topics that also impact our special needs families. Today we're gonna be talking about change. So first of all, before we get into our topic, I just want to thank everybody who's catching us live on Facebook. We are going to be making some changes in the year 2023 since we're talking about change, and we may be changing how we do our broadcasts. We are building our website, which has been promised for 2.5 years, and we've got our YouTube channel, and so we're going to be recording a lot more episodes with folks. We're going to have a lot more content that we're going to be developing this year. So we're excited, but in the meantime, we'll be announcing those changes as we get into the year. So in the meantime, for those of you who are catching us on Facebook Live at the moment, welcome, thank you. Please, put your comments in. I'm sure at some point my daughter Joe's gonna throw her 2 cents in. If you're catching us after the fact on our YouTube channel, thank you for watching. Please subscribe, share with your friends, and let people know who we are, where we are, just so we can get the word out and make sure that we're providing adequate support for our families. We're dealing with special needs issues. And if you're catching us on podcast outlets, welcome again for you as well. Please reply if there's something that intrigues you or piques your interest, or you've got some conversation that you'd like to be part of, or a topic that you think we should be talking about. If you want to email us at wearejusttwodads@gmail.com. We made it simple. We are just two dads, all one word. We are just two dads @gmail.com. And if you're catching us on WSTX AM radio down in the U.S. Virgin Islands, Happy New Year to you folks as well. And we're going to get into our conversation talking about change, since that always seems to be the topic in the new year, right? People flip the calendar like, okay, we're gonna change the way we've done things. And so I'm kind of excited to be talking about this conversation because to some people, the changing of the calendar means nothing. New Year doesn't really mean anything to them. They're just another day. New Year's this year was just another Sunday. I did my crossword puzzles. I do every Sunday. So Shawn, as we get into this topic, how are you doing? I'm excited to be doing this and breaking another year with you. How are you feeling this morning?
Good, really good.
I almost believe you.
Yeah, because I'm thinking like there's
answer.
I'm reflecting a lot on the past year, and it's funny because I was thinking of what you said. You mentioned, for most people, you were talking about change in the new year. For most people, it doesn't mean much other than saying Happy New Year and the salutations and the greetings, and that's about it. I mean, there's a reason why a gym is jam-packed the first business day of January, and every machine, more parking spaces and everything are easy to find in February, even easier in March, because most people would like to change their lives, but most people don't want to change. And then as a result, when change is put upon us, we're such creatures of both habit and survival. But before I continue further, I want to make sure that speaking of change, as years go by, I want to wish a happy birthday to my brother Ray. Today's his birthday.
Happy birthday, Ray!
And that always means something. Generally speaking, it means something because you're talking about the new year, and I've got this thing where I'm talking about like you said, people will say new year, new me, and I'm thinking more than New Year's resolutions. What probably I think carries a little more weight is maybe a new life resolution. What do you want? What kind of change do you want to make? Because you don't want to make the change and then, within 12 months, you're back to whoever you were before. So his birthday means something, generally speaking, and especially does because of the time of year. But there's been a lot of departure that's taken place, and seen people pass away, in some cases just the past couple of days. So to be able to have him here and to be able to celebrate life, it's a blessing. So I'm eternally grateful for it. If you know him, send him a happy birthday. But with that said, I think that there's sometimes you and I talk about our topics and we put great plan into the topic. And sometimes I feel like the topics really just come visit us. And that's what took place here today. And I know that there are people that are really serious about changes and doing great things going forward with the year. But I know that for those of us that are parents or caregivers to those with special needs, that can be a challenge, because change is a constant anyway. There's an old song originally recorded by Quincy Jones called "Everything Must Change," and the lyrics go, everything must change, nothing stays the same. Nothing and no one goes unchanged. There are not many things in life that you can count on, except sun comes after rain, hummingbirds do fly, and that's essential. So what happens is if we fighting change is a losing battle. So if you implement it, it can add great quality to your life. But again, when you're a caregiver or parent to one with special needs, depending on the diagnosis and the exact situation, sometimes all you want is comfort, and for those of us whose children or loved ones are on the autism spectrum, any kind of change in routine is something that doesn't usually go well. And you're trying to, there's this constant battle. You're trying to implement a certain amount of change for the better, but then you're also trying to make things, remain the same. And it's a constant fight, because the one thing we learn with Elijah all the time is like, if you put something in front of him, whether it's a new pair of shoes, a different type of food or something like that, you really never know what it is that's going to take place. And you have to fight to change that mentality, because your first thought can be, well, he doesn't really like that. Have you guys ever tried so-and-so? No, we don't. That's not something we do. And it might be something you might have wished or wanted to do. It's the reason why when we have guests, we close the show by saying the ability, our ability to change the world is tied to our ability or willingness to change ourselves. And we ask for an example of a belief that you once really felt strongly about, but no longer believed to be true. So change is something that should be sought, because it's going to be dumped upon you whether you like it or not.
For sure. I think, it's funny because we celebrate it. It's the one thing that the entire world celebrates together, right? It's something that we all recognize, the new year. Part of that happens, because, we get to the holidays and everybody seems to sort of wind down business, most cases, with the exception of retail. Business kind of winds down at the end of the year, family get-togethers, it's a new, it's a way to sort of celebrate not just the holiday, but the completion of the year. And then once the celebration is over, we have a new year, and starting the calendar, we rip the calendar page and we're on a new year. So that there's a point of demarcation. By the way, in the Jewish faith, the new year is, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. There's that 10-day period between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur where, it's a reflection on what the past year was, atone for your sins, and then rebirth and starting over again, and as a new year. For parents of special needs children, that day of diagnosis is a point of demarcation, right? Where your new year or your new life or your new expectations change on that day, right? Because it's a significant change. It's not just a change in your calendar, but a change in the process. By the way, if you're in an accident, or you have, for those folks, we're at the beginning of the year. For those folks who are watching football on Monday night, and, just to bring that up, a Buffalo Bills football player on Monday Night Football was, hit and had to have CPR done on the field. That person's life was forever changed. His teammates, their lives were forever changed. The fans in the stands were changed. Like in any moment, there's that significant change. The calendar doesn't mean anything. It's something that causes you to change. Again, as a parent of a special needs child, that date of diagnosis is as significant of change as flipping the calendar page. So the point is, how do you adapt, right? It's not just the new year, but how do you adapt to any of that kind of change? It's a reconfiguration of your expectations and the things that you thought, the picture that you had planned, the picture that you had envisioned for yourself and your family and your child, your loved ones, right? That all shifts. And so how you deal with that circumstance is critical. And by the way, there's no right or wrong way to deal with change, right? There's nothing that says you have to adapt this way or that way, right? People do it a different way. So it's interesting. It's how people choose to adapt. That we're talking about.
Most definitely. And it's interesting because I don't think that, I haven't seen a study or anything like that, but I think that most people, and it'd be interesting to see in terms of, exactly why we don't do well with change, in most cases, to the point where I think people that are constantly going through change, whether it's an appearance, hairstyle or whatever have you, I think that's a little exceptional. Most people we're said to be creatures of comfort. I know that, my consciousness is high enough, at least to the point where I try and pay attention to what I think about and how I respond to certain things. And I'll catch myself, in terms of how much something really bothers me when my routine or something is thrown off, especially if, it's not as bad as I thought. Like, say I'm looking for a certain, I don't know, shirt or something I want to wear. I don't know. I'm just like, why is that not here? I had it right here. Why would anybody move it? Why is it bothering me that much? And then as soon as I, may locate it, my thought is, wow, was it really that serious? What if you didn't find it? What would it really have meant?
Yeah. I think part of the issue is why I think here's my feeling. I think part of the reason why people have such an issue with change and such a problem with change is that when you take something on, in a way you rationalize or you have adopted a particular way of being. Like, by the way, hairstyle, right? I'm going with a certain hairstyle, and this is a really crazy analogy. Go with a different hairstyle, right? I've decided to put my hair up like this and not put stuff in my hair. That's what it looks like today. I have considerations, and I've decided I want to wear my hair this way, right? So if I change, I know this is crazy, you guys, but if I change it, it requires me to create a new adoption of some other reasoning for the change. The way I dress. I think this is why the challenge when some people have a change in their business, so that they're running their business a certain way, and then somebody implements change. Well, they've adopted the reasoning behind doing their business a certain way, and so then if there's change, you're like, oh, I can't do it the way that I've committed to or the way that I'm used to. I'm used to doing it this way. It's always the same thing over and over. And now I gotta do something different. Now I've got to adopt something different. And I think honestly, it's a mindset shift that's required to take on change, right? To accept the change, because you're adopting. So it's like adopting versus adapting to some degree.
Right. Right.
You adapt to the change, and then you adopt a new a new reasoning behind it. Like, well, I'm going to do this, but last week you said you're going to do that. I know. Well, this was my reason for doing that, and now what I found in doing that, I now have to do this because my ultimate goal is the same, right? So change, in whether it's personal or change that is sort of put upon you, that you don't really have a lot of choice in initially, I think it requires a shift. I think that's why some people have a lot of difficulty with that. Change that you choose, you have to have sort of the end game in mind in order to. It's a lot like, we used to say this analogy. If you're sailing, if you're on a sailboat and you're on, I sailed many years ago. I sailed with a bunch of guys from National Geographic. We're on the Chesapeake Bay. That's a massive bay, and we were sailing, and our goal was to get to point, A over here. Well, in sailing, currents, wind, and everything, kind of knocks you off track, right? You can go from point A to point B, but the reality is, when you're a sailboat, you're kind of subject to whatever happens. The idea is that if you can keep your eye on the end game, the goal, doesn't matter if you get blown off course, you just reorient and go back towards your goal.
Mhm.
That's when we take on change ourselves. Like my goal is to get to this, whatever it is. I'm going to get a promotion, or I'm going to build a business, or I'm going to make a certain amount of money, or I'm going to do something, right? And then along the way, sometimes we get thrown off course, and then our choice is to go, well, I'm going to get thrown off course, and I'm going to go that way. That doesn't make a lot of sense. But if my goal is on the same end game here, and I get thrown off course, I just reorient and go towards that game. It makes adapting to change a lot easier because your goal is still the same. There's a lot of talk. But
Well, I think I was just going to say, you're absolutely right, because I think it has a lot to do with control. I think most people, like when you think about what most people want in life altogether, it's about freedom, control, and options. And that's why money carries the value that it does. So it's not even about, I want the car, I want the house, I want to be able to do this for my mom, or do so and so for give to this person. It's not so much that act, but the feeling, and you get to control when that takes place. And there's a certain amount of control that we have snatched from us when a diagnosis takes place and you're a parent or a caregiver. It's just, it's relinquished right away. So there's one thing to be struggling with a fight that you have created, whether it's losing weight, earning a certain amount of money, any other kind of health goal that you might want to, attain, a relationship, whatever the case might be. There's a challenge in that, but you've stepped forth and decided to do that. Any other change that's then thrust upon us is a lot more difficult to handle.
It is. And again, it requires a mindset shift. If you don't, again, it goes back to the same point. If you don't see the end game, you can be challenged. A lot of times people in a large organization, right? Some changes imposed, and everybody's like, well, why do they do that? By the way, not just in a large organization, social media, like we saw, Elon Musk take over Twitter, and the users of Twitter were like, well, why is it doing this? And why is it doing that? And then if there's no clear answer or a clear understanding of what the change was, that was imposed, what the goal was, then people start assuming things, right? They start making their own stories up. They start saying, so that's because there's no clarity in ultimately what the ultimate goal is. So the more clarity you have in sort of describing it, it's easier to adopt the change. Otherwise, people are just going to resist. I don't want to do that. It's not why I joined this. It's not why I came to this company. It's not why I signed on to Facebook. It's not why I did these things. I did these things for a particular reason. Now the end goal has changed, right? Or I don't agree with it, or that doesn't fit my own personal distinctions here. And so I'm going to now do something different, or I'm going to, resist the change, in essence.
Yeah. And I think almost it's rare that you do that and then find that people go with it and they're glad for the change, unless you identify some problem and then the change is the solution or answer to that problem. The best example of that, I guess, is classic Coke back in 1985. That's very random, but that was supposed to be just an improvement. And there was a rebellion. The public spoke and they're like, oh, never mind. And they just got rid of it. Did better than they did to begin with. I guess they created a problem and then,
right.
The original thing became the solution.
It's a really good point. Listen, I worked in my dad's grocery store, and I used to see these brands do this all the time. I remember, this is going to sound crazy, when Downy, you guys know the fabric softener, it's in the blue bottle, and they had a blue cap, plastic cap on the top, and for some reason they changed it to pink. We couldn't sell a bottle of Downy fabric. It was the best-selling fabric softener we had in the store. They made a change, and they changed the label. The front label had some pink added to it, and the top label was pink. Sales went to zero. It was crazy. So some people think, well, if you've made a change like Classic Coke, but you've now changed the thing that it worked for me. Like, I'm used to that. It's so crazy that people were starting to buy fabric softener that they had never bought before, rather than stick with Downy, because they felt like a change had been made, imposed upon them, as you said, thrust upon them without their input, and they decided to make a change with their with their buying dollars. So it does. People definitely have a resistance to change if they don't know the reason, if they don't understand it. if it's not clearly been communicated, it can be a challenge. Again, that's when it's sort of thrust upon you. And we're talking about stuff like commercial things like selling retail items. When it comes to, having that diagnosis, and that's something that's sort of thrust upon you. Again, how people adapt to that change, right? Now my picture of my child's life looks different, and we talk about this a lot, the day of diagnosis with a lot of the guests that we have on our podcast about, what does that look like for them, that date of diagnosis? It's a point of demarcation. It's a significant date. And some people I didn't know what to do. And, some people withdraw, and some people go on the attack. Okay, this is the new reality. Here's what we need. I think this is what we need to do. Let me go find out some answers. Let me go attack it and go after it. Could you imagine, Shawn, if everybody took on that kind of thing when it came to change? We talk about it with the new year with resolutions. Okay, I'm going to do something different, right? But then we're easily thrown back into our old ways. Our habits go back to the old ways of doing things. But you don't have that choice when your child is diagnosed with a special needs issue. There is no going back to the way it used to be. It is now forever changed, right? And so you have to attack and stay on the attack and keep looking for answers, solutions, adjustments, accommodations, all of those things. You don't have a choice. Your life has been changed.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And, speaking of change, one of the things that we want to do, it's not really, I don't know if it's change or if it's upping the ante in terms of our intent. But we'd love to hear from you guys in terms of, generally speaking, because we created the show. Look, we could sit up and just, talk all day. We enjoy each other's company. We enjoy conversations. We both, can be long-winded. So we could just sit here and talk, but we want to make sure that we're adding value to people's time. And so generally speaking, we want to hear from you in terms of topics and things that are important to you, things that you might want to hear about, things you might questions or problems that you might be looking for solutions to. Whatever answers we don't have, we can make them easier to find because we know people. And when it comes to something like this, a topic like change, love to hear some of the challenges that you face as caregivers or parents to those with special needs. What are some of the biggest changes or challenges that you might be experiencing? And what are some of the biggest ones that you seek also? Those are things that we like to know, whether you're catching this live or after the fact on the YouTube channel, or even on any of the podcast platforms, including Apple, Spotify, or any of the other ones that we're on.
Yeah. And I think, by the way, let's, also a little shout out and Happy New Year to Sean Hall out in Hawaii, who kind of keeps us on track and manages. So Sean will let us know, if people comment on the YouTube channel, he kind of, keeps us in line when it comes to that type of stuff too. So we will answer, we do answer. So, send us an email or post something on our YouTube channel or on our Facebook page. We'd love to hear from you. It's so funny. I was thinking about this. I do love this topic. A lot of times, just so you all know, complete transparency. A lot of the times when we don't have a guest, the topic hits Shawn in a certain way, and Shawn's like, I think we should do this topic. 90% of the time, I'm like, yeah, sure, that sounds great. 10% of the time, I'm like, actually, I will say this: 100% of the time, I go, okay, why this topic? I'm cool with it. We could, as Shawn said, we could talk about anything. We love each other's company, and we have this.
Let me just say one thing there as you're doing that. Catch the value in what he just said there, and this isn't just a mutual admiration society, but make sure there's people in your life that ask questions. Like the questions are more powerful than statements. And so, whenever he asked me, well, why that topic? The average person might say, well, what do you mean why? When he asked me why, I feel like I'm opening a gift. And it's like, I'm reaffirming to myself, why. One of the greatest lines said multiple times in Wakanda Forever, the new Black Panther movie, well, it's not new at this point, is, there's a question that's asked and the response is, how is not important is not half as important as why.
Yeah, for sure. So the reality is every topic that, that we bring up, I love the topic. Otherwise, I'd be like, that does not do that, Shawn. That doesn't make sense. But that's never
Mhm.
happened. So I love the conversation about change because for a number of reasons. First of all, in our financial services business, we've implemented a change just internally in the work that Shawn and I do to take the platform that we've been using for the last 10, well, in Shawn's case, 15 years, in my case, the last 8 years, and we've added to it. We've added components to it to make sure that we're helping folks, maximize their opportunities for generating and growing their wealth. And so it's funny to see that even when you make changes that sort of enhance the business and expand the opportunity, there's just a general tendency to resist a little bit. Like it's a little bit of like, well, that's a little bit different. Like I agree with it, but that's a little bit different. And it takes some practice. It takes some work. It takes some talking through those areas of resistance to get people to understand. It takes sitting with clients and actually working through and showing folks how this becomes an enhanced offering. Even when the change is something positive and additive, there's a tendency to resist. And again, part of it, I go back to what I was saying before, which is people like, I was on board with the last thing, and now I've got to be on board with this thing, and you have to convince people that it's not different; it's just more, right?
Yeah.
So, but we talk about it at every level, whether it's business, family, personal. We talk about always improving. I think that at the end of the day, you have to be in a mode of improving. I think if you listen to any motivational speaker, any successful business person, any person that has achieved a level of success, the key to it is being able to change, being able to adopt, being able to make decisions quickly and change your mind slowly. Those are the kinds of things that they all believe that change is inevitable. Because again, you could have the greatest business in the world, and then the economy, changes because of a pandemic, and your business goes. You could have had the greatest restaurant idea in the world and launched it March 2021, and then what happened? So it doesn't matter, right? You can have the greatest concept, but changes happen all the time. So you have to be able to adapt. You have to be able to.
This is either going to sound like a genius analogy or nuts, but two things. If you think about, like for me, so my biggest two of my biggest heroes in music are Michael Jackson and Prince. And if you think about them, I think you could say the same thing about Stevie Wonder. I think if you look at most great artists, there's an era, especially someone that has a long career. There's an era that's defined by maybe what they wore or how they sounded. And that's because you're constantly growing and changing. And one of the most powerful questions you could ever ask is when is the last time you did something for the first time? Because if the answer is a very long time, then it might be something that's worth changing. And if you stop to think about, if you knew exactly how much time you had left on the planet, what would you change? How worth it would it be? What would you give up in order to get that change? So the answer isn't just like moving all mountains in order to make certain things happen. It's also about moving certain things out of the way in order to move the mountain. Because, as we talked about one of the previous, our most recent episode, I think it was last week, towards the, at the end of December, we were talking about, a life change as opposed to resolution. And, looking at your rate of return on where you invest your time, all of that is a product of change.
For sure. Yeah, no. I agreed. So it really is. I was thinking about this as I watch a lot of got up a lot of movies and entertainment stuff during the break, which was great. And thinking about I watched The Offer, which was sort of the making of The Godfather, right? It's a series making of The Godfather, and what was happening back in those days in the 70s when that movie came out. And it's so funny because we think, we've evolved so much since in the last 50 years. It's a 50-year anniversary of the release of The Godfather. We haven't. We haven't really. Like
Mm-hmm.
we've made some advancements. We've made some changes. We've made some things for the better. But a lot of the issues that that we were having in 1972, not much different than what's happening in 2022. An overseas war, politicians that we don't agree with, creating distinct chasms between sides. There was a lot of rights movements that were occurring. There's a lot of disgruntled citizenry, and a lot of things that were happening in 1972. As I'm just reflecting back and feel like we've made so many changes the last 50 years. At the same time, we haven't made a lot of changes. Shows the resistance to change as an entire society. I think the only thing that we can control is our own personal goals, drives, lives, and how we make changes in our lives, how we adopt to the change. And again, to your point, is there a good reason to do it? No, nobody thinks you should change just for the sake of changing. What's the reason? What's the considerations? Where are you? Is it something that actually gets you to wherever you are in your evolutionary path? So anyways, I'm just fascinated by looking back at anything that's sort of dated, or anything that's, to your point, music has changed considerably over the last 50, 100 years. The artists who have had long careers, they're you're right. There have been times when you're like, man, that's something new coming out of that artist. They never would have thought that they would have done that. Could you imagine Prince doing country? Could have happened, I guess, at some point, right?
Well, believe it or not, he's got there was a song that he wrote for Kenny Rogers, which Kenny recorded. So yeah,
that's cool. See, there you go, perfect example.
Yeah, but it's a product of again that, which is, and I know it starts with a question. I don't know, maybe he was just so instinctive that he's just let me just go. How about I do this? And maybe there's not a thought and a question, but again, if there's something powerful, and like when's the last time you did so and so for the first time? Again, kind of random, but there's at Christmas time in the Virgin Islands, it's very common for us to make what we call tarts. So it's, you have a French tart, and it's, I don't know where the name comes from for these particular dishes, but they're like pies, and there's a lattice across the top, and the flavors are typically coconut, pineapple, guava, or guava berry, which are, all distinctly different fruits. And every year, like probably the 24th of December, I get to thinking about, oh my gosh, who makes them? Where can I get them? And I thought this year, I was like, why don't I get a recipe? And I had a friend who had posted that, she made some a couple of years ago, got the recipe, and it ended up being a great experience, sharing time with my mom and my uncle. My uncle came to visit from Vegas. He's not from the Virgin Islands. He's not familiar with it all. So he got to learn about that. And I got the time with my mom making them. We made several of them. Man, it's a lot of work. But that in itself is change. Again, some people are hearing these things going, what is he talking about? Or some of them are saying, I get that analogy. Or he's nuts. Who knows? I don't know which one.
I covered all three of those, by the way, in my head. So
see, so then that means that you're hitting every demographic there. People that are like, oh my gosh, genius, nut. What is he talking about?
Exactly.
But this show is an example of that too. When it comes to changes, if you have something to give, go ahead and put it out there. Like we would stop and think about doing this show. I don't think we thought much about it other than we wanted to. And speaking of change, we keep thinking of ways that we can improve on our brand and what we do and add value to other people's time. And Brian and I belonged to a men's group where we got some things out of that group. We've had conversation about starting one of our own. And the reason why I bring that up is because that would be some change, and it's an addition. But the other thing we've talked about is, again, your ROI, your rate of the return on the investment of your time. And we don't want to offer something that people won't necessarily be receptive to. And we have the thought that, a lot of men that are parents and caregivers to those with special needs don't necessarily have an outlet to express feelings, concerns, hopes, desires, things of that sort. And so we've thought about the idea of having a men's group to do that, but it takes time to do something like that. We're looking to meet once a month virtually, online, and have conversations that men might be open to sharing. Maybe there's something that you're looking for. Maybe there's a man in your life who is a parent or caregiver that you think might get something out of that. This might fall on some deaf ears, but if we're going to take the time to do something like that, we'd love to hear from people that might find value in that. We want to know that value is being added to someone's time as opposed to anything being shoved down anybody's throat. And each male that I've spoken to about that has said, "Oh, that's a great idea. Let me know when you launch that." I've had a couple of females that say the same thing as well. But we'd like to get some feedback. So sort of a survey, so to speak, and we may do that in more of a much formal sense in terms of putting a feeler out there in terms of a survey to figure out, where people stand with something like that. Because we like to, life is short. We want to make sure that we're exchanging energy. We don't want anybody robbing ours, of course, and we most definitely don't want to make any attempt, intentional or otherwise, to take energy from anyone else. We want to exchange energy, and so we want to make sure that we add value. So keep an eye out for that. And as you're listening to this, live or otherwise, feel free to chime in as to how you feel about something like that.
Yeah, let us know. Send us an email at wearejusttwodads@gmail.com and let us know if that's something that would be of interest, or if you know somebody who would be interested in doing that or helping us moderate that, or take a hand. A lot of folks in the special needs community, over the last 2.5 years, we've had a lot of people say to us, "Man, it's amazing that you guys do this," because usually it's a mom support group like We Are Brave together, or that moms generally get together. They're the they're the mom warriors, the warrior moms, and it's rare that we get dads talking about this stuff. We had such a great experience with the folks at IBD Strong, talking about irritable bowel syndrome. And so those folks were impressed by the fact that we were just men talking about these kinds of subjects. So, we thought, there's more to this, and, often men don't feel safe to, talk about things openly in a larger forum, but for a men's group opportunity, a safe place to discuss these things where you feel like you're not alone. You're not the only one. We share, so many things in common, that it just gives us a place to talk about things. We'll have topics every month of things to talk about and make a difference in people's lives. At the end of the day, that's kind of what we're trying to do.
And it'll be private.
Yeah, right. So everything stays safe, stays within the conversation. So let us know if that's something that's of interest to you. Our email address is in the chat. We are justtwodads@gmail.com. And we look forward to hearing from you if that's something of interest, a men's group for dads in the special needs community or serving the special needs community. But maybe you service the special needs community and you've noticed something that could be beneficial for all dads to know about, right? Involvement and, attention, certain things that dads are, good at. Maybe you've been an in-home provider and you've noticed, a difference with your client when dads are involved, whatnot, or when dads pull away, whatever it is. If you have something that you think that dads should know about, we want to make a difference in the lives of dads who are caregivers of, family members with special needs as well. So that's really what we're doing that. So glad you're bringing it up. And again, when Shawn's like, we should do this, my first question is always like, why now? Why? What's the goal? What are we trying to accomplish? Where are we going with that? What's the ultimate? What's the result you're looking to have, and how are you measuring the results, right? Because at the end of the day, the ROI component is always important, right? Do we have time to do another group activity? There's certain things that you can measure financially. There's certain things you can measure time and energy wise. And then there's stuff that you cannot measure. And so I acknowledge that, even though I'm like, okay, where's the ROI in doing, whatever we're going to do next, that sometimes there's just a sort of a spiritual or a universal benefit that is not measured in the typical terms of measurement that we have for other things in our lives. So I'm open to us doing that. I would love for you to let us know. By the way, Mark Esposito is actually somebody I had in mind specifically when I made that comment. So we just liked our video. Mark is a unique individual. Mark was introduced to us. We had him on our show, gosh, probably over a year ago, Shawn.
Yeah, it's been over a year.
Mark,
yeah.
Mark doesn't have a family member in this special needs community, but Mark serves those young adults, from an educational perspective, adults in the special needs community and children transitioning to a young adult level in special needs community through education. And one of those, again, just one of those great servants, if you will, of this bigger crusade and this goal. And we're, appreciative of the work that he does with his clients, and a perfect example of somebody who serves the community and makes a difference in the lives of people around him. So, and not coming from a place where he's got a child or a family member in the community itself, just decided to service it. So
it's one of those people that we're members of the community because, our kid's diagnosis. So there's no choice. That's what you do.
Right.
Right. But he's an example of one of those people that has become a member of the community by choice. And so if you're one of those people, again, we'd love to hear from you. If you've been anyone else that's been a guest on the show, each and every one of you, you're going to hear from us with regard to that too. It's something that we'd really like to do, but we want to make sure that it's very targeted and purposeful. And that's one of the things that we've, speaking with change, that we've decided to do both individually and together, which is living a life, with as much purpose as possible. I give this example so often. How many times do you pull into your driveway or your parking space in your apartment complex or whatever the case may be? And there's a tiny part of you that, you got there because you know the route from work.
Yeah.
But you know it so well that there's part of you that like it's automatic and it's like, how did I get here? You know it well enough to have not ran a light or gone through a stop sign, but it's so instinctive. And most of us live our lives that way. And being able to live with purpose and intent, that in itself is a change also, because most of us don't operate that way. And again, that's just something that we're trying to do. So we want to make sure that we're as intentional as possible and add as much value to the time of others as we possibly humanly can.
Yeah. One of our great mentors, Jeff Levitan, does a program called Living Life on Purpose. And we take that on ourselves, regularly, making sure that we are doing things that, for a reason with intentionality, not just happenstance and circumstance.
Yeah, most definitely.
It's a good idea.
Well, at this point we have a little more time than we, ordinarily, usually do when we begin to kind of wind down. But I think it's just as appropriate for us to do that here today because,
sure.
Again, we're trying to make sure that we add value, and we got a lot of things coming up. I'm really excited about the coming year. Yeah,
it's gonna be a fun year, and I'm excited and implementing change along the way. So looking forward to that. So as we wrap up this edition of Just Two Dads, our short New Year edition, we're going to be very, very on point, intentional this year. That's what we're going to be doing, and some changes coming up for the show too. So look for different content, additional content, more content on our YouTube channel at Just Two Dads. Look for Just Two Dads on our YouTube channel. Email us at wearejusttwodads@gmail.com. We want to thank all of you for being part of our lives and for sharing a little bit of your time with us. It means a lot to us. Even if we don't hear from you, we know that you're out there, and hopefully we're making a difference in your life. I want to thank you folks who are on Facebook Live, and again, those who are catching us after the fact on the YouTube channel and on our podcasts. Podcast outlets wherever, and at WSTX AM radio down in the U.S. Virgin Islands. Thank you. We hope that this is a phenomenal new year for all of you. And as one thing that's not going to change is my sign off at the end of every show is the same, which is, empathy and love is so important. Look at somebody's situation with empathy and not judgment. And you never know what somebody else is going through. So have some empathy and care for one another. That would be a nice change that we would love to see in our, around the world, that people care for others. And if you look at the world through the lenses of love, it makes a huge difference. The world will look completely different. So thank you for your time. Thank you for spending it with us. Happy New Year. Here's to a fantastic 2023. I throw it over to Shawn to close us out today.
I want to thank everyone for taking the time to tune in, whether you're doing so live after the fact on our YouTube channel or SDX AM radio in St. Croix, U.S. Virgin Islands. I want to say hello to my family there and to my good friend Robert Moorhead, who is responsible for us being on air there. I also want to thank the women in my life without whom I would not be. That is my mom, Jan, and my amazing wife, Laura. And I want to also remind you again to take a look at the link that's on the screen as well regarding Billy Footwear. They're a fantastic company. Billy's been a guest on our Billy Price, the founder of the company, has been a guest on our show before. They make adaptive footwear. There's a 10% discount that you get if you use the code that's in the link. And remember, again, questions are more powerful than statements. Everybody needs to be seen. Everybody needs to be heard. Needs to be loved. And need to know that they matter. And wherever you're catching this, wherever you're within the sound of my voice, just know that we love you.
We love you. Shawn Hall, we love you. Thanks again, everybody. See you again next week.